Kyiv talks up counteroffensive. Turkey's Erdogan wins another term as president. IPEF talks produce deal on supply chain crisis response network. Biden and McCarthy have tentative U.S. debt ceiling deal. South Korea holds first Pacific Island States Summit. Twitter abandons EU's voluntary pact against disinformation. South Korea to avoid cashing in on China's U.S. chipmaker ban. Memorial Day BBQs in the U.S. will cost more this year.
Hello, I'm Amber. Thank you for joining us on Funday News. It is Monday, May 29th, and here are your top stories. Senior Ukrainian officials indicated last Saturday that their forces were ready to launch a long-promised counteroffensive to recapture territory taken by Russia since the start of the war. In a statement on Telegram, Ukraine Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said Russian troops were continuing to attack, but that overall offensive activity had decreased. Yesterday and today, there have not been any active battles. Kyiv is expected to launch a highly anticipated counteroffensive soon to retake Russian-occupied territory.
Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Oleksiy Danilov, told the BBC that the push could begin anytime. Ukrainian presidential aide Mikhailo Podolyak said preliminary operations such as destroying supply lines or blowing up depots had already begun. Ukraine's top general, Valery Zaluzhny, posted a sleekly produced video last Saturday showing Ukrainian troops swearing an oath and preparing for battle. He wrote, "The time has come to return what is ours."
Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan won re-election Sunday, extending his increasingly authoritarian rule into a third decade. With more than 99% of ballot boxes opened, unofficial results from competing news agencies showed Erdogan with 52% of the vote, compared with 48% for his challenger, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. The head of Turkey's electoral board confirmed the victory, saying that even after accounting for outstanding votes, the result was another term for Erdogan.
Critics blame Erdogan's unconventional economic policies for skyrocketing inflation that has fueled a cost of living crisis. Many also faulted his government for a slow response to the earthquake that killed more than 50,000 people in Turkey. Still, Erdogan has retained the backing of conservative voters who remain devoted to him for lifting Islam's profile in Turkey, which was founded on secular principles, and for raising the country's influence in world politics.
The U.S. Commerce Department said last Saturday that trade ministers of 14 countries in the U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework talks substantially completed a deal to make supply chains more resilient and secure. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo told a press conference in Detroit that the first-of-its-kind agreement calls for countries to form a council to coordinate supply chain activities and a crisis response network to give early warnings to IPEF countries of potential supply disruptions.
It's all designed to align our approaches on a secure supply chain, export controls, data governance, and investment screening.
The deal provides an emergency communications channel for IPEF countries to seek support during supply chain disruptions, coordinate more closely during a crisis, and recover more quickly. The supply chains agreement also includes a new labor rights advisory board aimed at raising labor standards in supply chains, consisting of government, worker, and employer representatives. The supply chain negotiations aimed in part at providing countries in the region with an alternative to closer ties with China.
U.S. President Joe Biden and top congressional Republican Kevin McCarthy have reached a tentative deal to raise the federal government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. Biden and McCarthy reached the deal after a 90-minute phone call last Saturday evening. The deal would raise the debt limit for 2 years while capping spending over that time and include some extra work requirements for programs for the poor. McCarthy said he expects to finish writing the bill Sunday, then speak to Biden and have a vote on the deal on Wednesday.
Reuters reported the deal will avert an economically destabilizing default, so long as they succeed in passing it through the narrowly divided Congress before the Treasury Department runs short of money to cover all its obligations, which it warned last Friday will occur if the debt ceiling is not raised by June 5. Reuters cited sources as saying negotiators have agreed to cap non-defense discretionary spending at 2023 levels for 1 year and increase it by 1% in 2025.
I always needed time on my own. I never thought I'd be here.
I take your blessings with your heartaches too. It's so easy and so wonderful to know it's you.
学习，一切从今天开始。Funday 英语。
South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol will hold a summit to meet Pacific Island leaders in Seoul on Monday. Australia's Defense Minister Richard Marles will attend the first Korea-Pacific Island Summit. France, which has Pacific overseas territories, will also join the Seoul meeting. Reuters reported in Seoul, climate change, investment, and fisheries are expected to feature in talks. Marles said Australia welcomes Korea's interest in deepening ties with the Pacific and looks forward to promoting a prosperous and resilient Pacific.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will host South Korea's first ever summit with Pacific Island nations next month.
Reuters reported this as the third summit between a large economy and Pacific Island leaders within a 7-day period, as the region seeks stronger action on climate change while becoming a focus of geopolitical power attention. Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles said it would show cooperation between the 18 members of the Pacific Island Forum and South Korea for a secure region. Pacific Islands Forum Secretary General Henry Puna said the back-to-back meetings with major economies were a massive boost for recognition of our priorities.
European Commissioner Thierry Breton tweeted last Friday that Twitter had pulled out of the EU's disinformation code of practice that other major social media platforms have pledged to support. He added that Twitter's obligation remained, referring to the EU's tough new digital rules taking effect in August. Breton tweeted, "You can run, but you can't hide." Google, TikTok, Microsoft, and Facebook and Instagram parent Meta are among those that have signed up to the EU code.
And there are concerns that under his control, hate speech will be allowed to flourish.
The EU's disinformation code of practice requires companies to measure their work on combating disinformation and issue regular reports on their progress. The European Commission blasted Twitter earlier this year for failing to provide a full first report under the code, saying it provided little specific information and no targeted data. Breton said that under the new digital rules that incorporate the code of practice, fighting disinformation will become a legal obligation. Our teams will be ready for enforcement.
According to a person familiar with the situation, Bloomberg reported South Korea will avoid capitalizing on China's ban on a U.S. chipmaker, seeing the move by Beijing as an attempt to drive a wedge between Seoul and Washington. The person said the South Korean government won't encourage its memory chip firms to grab market share in China lost by Micron Technology Inc., which has been bought for use in critical industries by Beijing on national security grounds.
He placed technology limits on semiconductors that South Korean companies produced in China.
China is the biggest market for South Korea semiconductor firms Samsung Electronics Company and SK Hynix Inc. and home to some of their factories. Their continued operations in China are dependent on licenses granted by Washington, giving the U.S. some leverage over Seoul's decisions on how it balances its economic engagement with both countries. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said last Saturday the U.S. was speaking to allies about China's action on Micron. She said we won't tolerate it.
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics' April Consumer Price Index rose 4.9% compared to the same period in 2022. Last month, the cost of food overall was up 7.7%. Groceries in particular were up 7.1%. Hot dogs and poultry cost more year over year, up 2.2% and up 5% respectively. On average, ground beef cost $4.65 per pound last month. That's only slightly lower than last year, which was approximately $4.7 per pound, but higher than the $3.96 figure back in 2020.
So consumers here in the U.S. at least can expect to spend more.
Spices, seasonings, condiments, sauces were up 10.3% year over year, as consumer product goods companies like Kraft Heinz lap price increases. The price of hot dogs and hamburger buns are higher too. On a yearly basis, prices for bakery products are up 12.9%, with white bread driving the cost higher, up 14.3%. For a pound of white bread, it will cost $1.96. That's the highest price ever recorded. Alcoholic beverages have increased by 4.6% compared to last year. The good news? No product shortages.
Now let's take a look at the vocabulary of the news of Twitter abandoning EU's voluntary pact against disinformation. Number 1. Disinformation 名词，尤其指政府机构故意发布的虚假资讯或是假消息。They spread disinformation in order to discredit politicians. Number 2. Pledge transitive verb 保证给予或是做，正式承诺。当名词用的话是保证、诺言或是誓约。We all had to pledge allegiance to the flag, meaning to state that we are loyal to our country. Will the government honor its election pledge not to raise taxes? Number 3. Take effect 生效、起作用或是奏效。Measures to reduce costs are beginning to take effect. And that's all for today's Funday News. Be sure to tune into Funday News from Monday to Friday and click the link below to join Funday for free. I'm Amber, your host. I'll see you next time.